Do you know what I like to do when I get to watch a live that I really enjoy? I like to look at some baseball cards. Guys, I want to do a response video here for a wonderful live I watched. I really enjoyed it. I was on a trip from my other house back home, and I made my wife listen to it through the car speakers, and she enjoyed it too. So I wanted to do a response on it because it triggered a lot of thoughts in my head. And it's from Card Cutter and Canadian Cards. So here we go.
I was talking to that good-looking dude next to me this morning, and we were talking about influence. And we'll get into the story of what we were talking about, but how we're influenced by other channels or other YouTubers or just other people in the hobby.
Mm-hmm.
So we were having a discussion, and it was about pre-war. You know, I've never been a pre-war collector. Believe it or not, at one time before YouTube, I was a vintage collector, but it was like of all the lower end guys that I could afford as a teenager and young adult. And I've noticed lately in the community, just more and more people are collecting pre-war, including like I'm getting very interested in it. And I don't understand it. I don't understand why. And kind of the analogy and the examples I gave Mike was, you know, people like, you know, Jim Brown or Al Kaline or Wilt Chamberlain, you know, you name it, Gordie Howe. You can find videos or clips of them playing in their career. In some instances, there's full games where you could go back and watch them. You know, all of those dudes played before I was born. But when you start talking about Cap Anson, Addie Joss, Christy Matheson, all these other dudes, it's like there's no clips of them playing. You know, you might see a wind up or something along those lines. And I'm just like, told Mike, like, why am I feeling the urge to want to collect this stuff?
This is a question that I hear a lot. You know, a lot of modern collectors will say that they don't want to collect anybody that they didn't see play. And I can understand that. I think for many collectors, and many in my generation, when we were young, we collected the players we watched on TV. But as we got more and more into cards, and we learned more and more about the game, modern was like a gateway drug where we wanted to go back and get some of the greats. We wanted to get some of those cool older cards because we never saw them before. And when you see them, you want to get them. We want to go back and get the players that our dads talked about and told us how great they were. We wanted to get players that were significant in the game. I think that's the difference between just collecting your idols that you get to watch and being into history. You know, I've always been into history, even in school, world history, history of the United States. And so my love of history and my love of cards get combined. My love of baseball, you know, everything gets to be combined when you collect cards. And I love the history of the cards themselves as well. So, of course, I wanted to collect guys like Joe DiMaggio because both Mickey Mantle and Ted Williams both said he was the greatest all-around player they had ever seen. I wanted to collect Willie Mays because my dad told me he was the best all-around player he ever personally saw. I wanted to collect Roberto Clemente because I grew up in Pittsburgh and he was just idolized. And I read his book when I was in the 5th grade. And it was an old beat up copy. And I read it every recess. And finally, one day, the teacher just handed it to me and she's like, just take it home with you. I read that thing so much. You know, I love the history of cards and of baseball. Here's a Tommy Leach. He was the first player to score a run in a World Series after doubling and led the league in home runs that year. Here's Owen Wilson. He has a record that will probably never be broken. 36 triples in a single season. Here's Sam Crawford, your all-time triples leader. Here's Deacon Philippe. Deacon Philippe is the only player, and will be the only player unless they change things, to pitch 5 complete games of a World Series, because the Pirates had one player go crazy and another get hurt. So they were down to basically him as a pitcher, and he had to pitch 5 games. Here's Dummy Taylor. He was a deaf pitcher, fantastic pitcher, and at the time, believed to be the wealthiest deaf person in America. Here's Bad Bill Burns. He was the one who orchestrated the 1919 Black Sox scandal, or was involved. Here's Charles Bennett. Now, Charles Bennett, the Tigers named their first stadium after him. He was in a train crash and lost both his legs, and he threw out the first pitch for years from a wheelchair. And he was a really good defensive catcher in the 1800s. Here is Ned Williamson. Ned Williamson held the single season home run record until Babe Ruth broke it in 1919. Here's Hugh Duffy. Hugh Duffy has the highest single season batting average in history. Here's Tip O'Neill. He was your 1887 Triple Crown winner. Here's Ezra Sutton, who is credited with hitting the first home run in Major League Baseball history. Here's Ollie Pickering. Ollie Pickering was playing in the Texas League. He went 7 for 7 one day, and all his hits barely left the infield. And the press coined his hits as Texas Leaguers. That's where the saying comes from. Here is Sock Seabold. Sock Seabold is from my area. His family moved to Jeannette, Pennsylvania. He became known as Sox for his great hitting. And he's the reason we know who Joe Jackson is. Connie Mack was rebuilding the team in Philadelphia, and he had a young player, Shoeless Joe, who kept running back home to Greenville, South Carolina, because he didn't like the city living. And Sox was at the end of his career, and he sent him down there to go get Shoeless Joe Jackson. They had dinner in the middle of the night. Shoeless Joe snuck off the train and went back home, and Sox had to go get him. If it wasn't for Sock Seabold, we may never know the name Shoeless Joe Jackson. So these are the kind of things that get my juices flowing. Let's see what else they have to say.
Like I was saying with the mantle, like I get why I want that. I understand it.
Yeah.
So early on in my collecting, like I said, that was always the card. So I can get it. But like I've never in my life, up until recently, it's like, man, I want to get an Natty Joss. Man, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I'd say, who the hell is that? You know? Cap Anson. I'd have said, what is that? What's a Cap Anson?
Yeah.
You know, and now I find myself, because of some of these guys in the comments, I'm blaming y'all.
Yeah. Like Rick Vintage Oddball.
And Rick.
Yeah.
Showing off all y'all's damn pre-war.
Yeah.
It's affecting my wallet. Knock it off.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I told Mike, it's like, I feel like I watched like y'all's Strongsville video. I think a lot of us, well, at least I do, go back and watch like old national videos whenever I get the itch.
Mm-hmm.
And now I find myself, because I'm going to Strongsville this year, going back watching old Strongsville videos. And I told Mike, when it comes to pre-war, I see everyone in the community, and I use not everyone, but a lot of us are going to Disneyland. All of us are collecting pre-war. And I told Mike, I want to go to Disneyland with everyone. I'm like, pick me. I don't want to get the speed pass. I don't want to go get a bunch of souvenirs. I just kind of want to join the group. I want to get 1, 2, 3, 30 pre-war cards, but I don't need to get all the big boys and the hammers and drain my bank account to do it. I just want to be part of the clique. And it's like,
Yeah.
why?
You want to ride the cups, the teacups, but you don't want to go on Space Mountain.
Right.
Yeah, I get it. It's true. It's a great analogy. Like, you want to be there, but I mean, I don't know. Like, it's got to be. I see a lot of people on YouTube, and good for them. I sometimes wonder though too. Do we think, or put your comments in here because I've been thinking about this. No, but do we try and are we in an age where we're keeping up with the Joneses? On YouTube, like there's always this saying, right? Collect what you like. It's, Chris says it's only a hobby. Collect what you like. If I like, I don't know. Modern quarterbacks, am I going to be, are people going to watch that? Nobody should have to keep up with anybody's collecting habits, because if that was the case, well, I seen the house that you bought. I'm like, shit, I want a big house like that. But no, it's not in the cards, right?
Okay, so a couple of points here. First off, on the comment, if I collect only modern quarterbacks, will people watch? I think you should be true to who you are. And I think if you are, and you have a passion, people will watch, no matter what you're into. I watch people and channels that don't share my way of collecting. I don't collect the things that they do, but I enjoy their channels. I don't collect unopened packs, but I watch Brandon's channel. I find it interesting. For me, I always had the goal, I want to be like Bob Ross. Who remembers Bob Ross, the old painter? I don't have a painter ability in my body. I can't paint anything. Totally not artistic. But I would find myself watching him. If you're interesting and you're authentic, you're true to who you are, I think people will watch. I wanted to talk about the keeping up with the Joneses too. That definitely happens. I think we all fall into that. When you go on to YouTube and see all these guys showing all kind of beautiful baseball cards, football cards, hockey cards, basketball cards, Olympic cards, whatever it is, boxing cards, oftentimes you were influenced. You want to get them after you see them. And I'm not sure influenced is the right word. My man Dylan, Double D, he always says inspired. When I was growing up, I remember when they first came out with Baseball Cards magazine. I couldn't believe they had a magazine just for baseball cards. And I would get baseball card books all the time, if I could find them, at Walden Books at my mall. And I would go through there. And I was influenced or inspired by what I would see in those books. I saw this in a book years ago, and I just picked it up maybe a year ago or so. And I always wanted it my whole life. I was influenced or inspired by seeing it in the book I had as a little kid, the 1960 Post Mickey Mantle. But being inspired or influenced is fun. How else are we going to learn about these cards we never saw before? Now, as far as wanting to keep up with the Joneses, I want to talk about that a little more. We're kind of in a society of haves and have-nots right now. You know, my generation, or maybe the people a little older than me, think about this for a minute. They're the first generation to retire with loaded 401ks. This generation, or just above me, is the first generation to inherit million-dollar homes from their parents. You know, the housing boom has created a lot of wealth for people who inherit. The older generation paid off their mortgage, lived there their whole life, and now you get a $1 million house for free. And there's a lot of money out there. The stock market is booming. Bitcoin is booming. Gold is booming. And for those people who invested in that, who had 401ks, who had inherited not only a house, but probably lots of money, it's a different world. I know. I have nieces and nephews who inherited $500,000. I mean, that just didn't happen when I was growing up. Not very often, only from very wealthy families. And so there is this situation where there are haves and have-nots. That's one reason you see so many cards selling for such high amounts of money. The other reason is this. You know, I never wanted to spend a lot of money on cards because you never know if they're going to retain their value. You don't know that. That's pure speculation. You know, I've lived through stock market crashes. I lived through the 2001 stock market crash, where it went from 11,000 to around 6,500 almost overnight. I lived through the 2008 stock market crash, where it went from 14,500 to 6,500 very quickly. I also lived through the housing collapse, where people were buying and flipping and getting interest-only loans, and houses were never going to go down again. And I can't tell you how many people I know lost their homes and or went bankrupt. And there was a time where when you were looking for a house, you had all these short sales and the banks were practically giving them away. People lost a lot of money, ruined their credit. You know, people who just started investing now, or who just started buying cards, you know, during the COVID boom, they don't know a down market. I mean, they'll complain about cards have pulled back, but they don't know about a crash. They have never lived through one. Until you go to bed at night and you want to cry, you're down so much money. You're not a real investor. So my point is that now I feel more comfortable, and I think a lot of people feel more comfortable paying a little more for these cards because we see them not going down. We see them retaining their value. And if we think that's going to happen, that they're going to retain their value and our families will have something or whatever, then I think we feel a little bit more comfortable spending thousands of dollars on a card, where I don't think we felt that comfortable in the past. You know, only real wealthy people or, you know, speculators. You look at guys that sold their cards for $1 million or whatever. You know, they got those back in the 90s. They didn't pay anywhere near that. And now we're in an era where you could pull a pack today. You could open a pack today and pull a card that's worth more than my entire collection. It's a big lottery. And anyway, with vintage cards, I just think it's those two things. I think we're living in the most affluent society ever. We haven't had any kind of market crashes, and people have more money to spend and feel more comfortable that they're not just throwing their money away. I've always had the opinion when I buy cards, and I'm a collector, so I'm not selling them, but I just assume I'm out that money. I've always just assumed that. There's no guarantees in life, but you know, sometimes we want something more than we want the money, right? If you always dreamed about having a Ferrari or a Tesla or whatever, you want that car more than you want the money. It's just the bottom line. And the cards I have, I wanted more than that particular money. I'm not the kind of person who spends $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $100,000 on a card, even if I want the card, no matter how bad I want the card, because I kind of like money too. And I'm a big stock market person. It's my other passion, and I'm in it all the time. And I love buying great dividend stocks, and I make money in my sleep, literally. And all the money I would take to buy these, I think about all the money I would miss out on. And although I love cards, I don't want to put my life savings into cards. I can still enjoy my cards, and I can still enjoy them at the pay points I'm comfortable with, And there are a lot of us on here, a lot of collectors who, man, you don't got to buy high grades to enjoy your card collection. Some of my most beautiful cards are 2s. Let's see what else they have to say.
I see guys, and I don't want to rattle off all the names, but there's just a lot of young dudes, and I'm 43, and so to me, young is like just in your 30s, mid 30s, early 30s, and I'm like, if I grew up collecting, and I've collected since I was like 7 or 8, never knew who the hell these guys were. Like, how the heck did these guys start collecting? And if it's influence, it's influence. Like, that's what I'm telling y'all. That's why I think I'm going to start collecting it, is influenced by my peers in the community. And I kind of would like, and I never say this, like right down below. I hate when people say that, but I would be interested to know, some of you younger guys, why y'all started collecting pre-war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I get vintage, like 50s and 60s, because when I started collecting in the 90s, a lot of the old heads in the community, not in the hobby, that was like what was in the showcases. But I didn't see pre-war, man. Like at the TriStar shows in Houston, like there wasn't many tobacco cards. Like that would have stuck out. It was the Manels and the Mays and the Aarons and all that stuff.
Sure. Everyone's got their own collecting niche, and you do you, I always say. But it's definitely, I think it was Mangini that said it, that everyone's buying these high dollar value cards at these shows, and I guess that's the place to buy them, at the bigger shows, because you get to see them. Cash talks. And who wants to buy a $10,000 card on eBay and then get it and have to try and get it sent back because you're not happy with it, or you want to see something like that in person. I was reading some of the comments here.
But I remember, I think you might have been there. I know Andy was there, and I know for a fact JT was there during the pandemic. We were talking one night, and we were talking about tobacco cards and all that. And I specifically remember saying, like, I had no interest in it. But I'm like, I have one. Like, I have one tobacco card.
Right.
And I remember Andy being like, well, go get it. And it wasn't graded at the time or anything. And I was like, it's this guy. This is what I got.
Little
recruit. He's like, who is that? Show it closer. So I showed it closer, and he's like, that's Rube Marquardt. And he's like, he's a Hall of Famer. And I'm like, shut up, dude. My first tobacco card. Like, that's kind of cool to me.
Yeah. There you go. So now you can buy more. You can do the set. T207 set. You're all set.
The T207 set is a great set. Many people don't like it because the images, they don't always look exactly like the player. But the T207 set is much more scarce than the T206, and I think than the T205 as well. They came in cigars, little cigars. Here is a package that they came in. They had different advertising on the back and some blank backs, but most you'll find are Little Recruit, and they were little cigars. Now, the interesting thing about the T207 set is it includes 3 players that neither the T206 set nor the T205 set did, and they are significant players. One is a guy I've always been fascinated with, banned from baseball because of the 1919 Black Sox. He fought that his entire career, his entire life, I should say, and his family continued to fight it after he passed away, and that's Buck Weaver. It also includes two of the early Cuban players, Rafael Almeida, tough card to find, and we have Marsans here, Armando Marsans. He came from a wealthy family. They had a coffee farm in Cuba, but he just loved to play baseball. And he came here and probably made a lot less money playing baseball. So you have these three players who you won't find in most other sets together. Let's see what else they have to say.
One thing I'm learning, because I have been watching a ton of pre-war and vintage collectors lately.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I think is super cool that I see specifically in those videos that I'm not seeing in like TTM videos, modern card collecting videos, is the education. I think Rick does a really good job. I hope he's not in here because I don't want him to hear a compliment. But Rick does a good job. Mangini does a good job. Sammy Thunder does a great job. And they just don't show you the card, but they talk to you about, variations and different colored backs and how many different colored backs. You just don't see that in modern cards. At least I don't. Hey, here's this 2024 Joe Burrow. Oh, here's the different variants, and this is, how you get them, and this is the product you get them in. And, and I think that's super cool that not only are guys showing off their pre-war, but they're educating others. And I think maybe, just maybe, that might be part of why others are going to it. Because you can show me something, and I might think it's cool, but if I don't know much about it, I may not gain interest in it.
I love this comment about education. I try to educate, and when you're talking about old vintage cards, there's so much to learn. I mean, I still see stuff I've never seen before, like every week. In the modern hobby, and this is the way it seems to me, just to me, it's all about, it's all about tens. And it's like a flex. And it's like, I don't know, outdoing each other. I think in the vintage world, it's more about being happy for somebody that they got their dream card. Or I see all these guys and they have these fantastic cards in low grade and they're so excited to get them. The modern hobby is not only about the tens, but it's about numbered cards, manufactured scarcity. I should put it that way. And I was watching a video, the rarest cards of the 1990s and the rarest cards of the 1980s. And I did get a kick out of it because they would be like, there's 45,000 of these graded, but there's only 4,000 graded at 10. So they're rare. Or there's only 3,000 graded at 10. And so now we not only have the manufactured scarcity, but now we have the scarcity of a number on a slab. And I think for most of us vintage collectors, we prefer or get a little more excited about the organic scarcity of a card. For instance, I have this 1928 Tabacalera. These were out of El Salvador, and the only cards I know ever to come out of El Salvador. This is a John McGraw, And this is the only copy ever graded. And I could care less what number's on it. It's the only one in existence, at least the only one known. You know, I wanted to own a card from this collection. It's the Black Swamp Fine collection. I saw it on Strange Inheritance and always wanted one. And I had an opportunity to pick one up pretty cheap. And I got the Three Finger Brown. Again, it's about where it came from, the provenance of it. I like to collect stamp backs for the history. You know, in the old vintage days, kids would put their initials or a stamp on the back of their cards. They just cherish these cards so much. And it's fun to try to reunite them. And I've only ever been able to reunite 2 cards together so far. And I have other ones I keep an eye out for. And that is the Cap Anson and Jack Glasscock. 2 great players from the 1800s. And they have a stamp from a guy or a kid from Manhattan. And they have the same stamp. Now, as you can see, these get a marked designation. Most slab collectors wouldn't want these. They're low grade. But to me, they're extra special. You know, these are somebody's prized possessions, and I'm able to reunite them probably long after they passed away. And I find that to be very cool. I love to collect the old postcards that have a stamp on them from 1909 or whenever, and have writing and read what somebody sent to somebody else. Those are little artifacts of history. And you think I give any care whatsoever what number's on them? Because PSA will give them a 1. They think they're junk. To me, they're worth more. They should be worth more. Let's see what else they have to say.
You talk about vintage and pre-war, but here's the other side to it. What percentage of the YouTube community do you feel is basically baseball?
Oh, it's huge, dude.
Like, I think it's at least, like, I always try and, when I'm analyzing things, use the 80-20 rule, right? Like 80% of the hobby is probably baseball. 20% is, some are football, some are modern, some are, hockey, whatever. But, because Scott brings up a good point about the small niche of football on here, the vintage football niche.
I think the reason baseball has always been king is for a few different reasons. Number one, baseball cards have the oldest history. And so for those of us who like the really old cards, 1800s, early 1900s, pro football didn't exist. Pro hockey didn't exist. Pro basketball didn't exist. The really old cards, you had baseball. You had boxing. And for football, college football was popular. And even after the NFL started, college football was still more popular. Here is a game ticket from Red Grange's last college game. And someone wrote on the back that they were here, and they give their name. They got to see Red Grange's last game in college, and he said he watched it with 80,000 fans, which sounds huge, if that's true. The other thing is, I don't think the other sports do a good enough job of promoting their history like Major League Baseball does. I watch football all the time, and you hear, bits and pieces here and there. If you watch the induction ceremony for the Baseball Hall of Fame, they bring back every living member, and they give them an introduction. We get to see them all the time. I don't think the NFL does a good enough job. And the other reason is the rule changes. They made all old records obsolete. Old stats look terrible. They've changed the number of games they play. They changed the rules. They made it, way easier for quarterbacks and receivers. So I think you have that going on. The other thing is, and I don't know why this is, but I believe it to be true. Baseball fans always seem to be more wanting to collect artifacts than other sports, in my opinion. You go back in time and see how many Babe Ruth autographs there are. People were getting his autographs back then. And they're collectors. And people will say, well, football is the most popular sport these days. And that's probably true. But football collectors, I've found over the years, aren't as into buying the cards and having, the artifacts from the games like baseball fans are. You don't see, I don't know, like in baseball, like everybody's chasing foul balls and they want all these things. You see home run balls selling for millions of dollars. I don't see that in football. So I think that's the other thing. Hockey has some vintage cards, but they don't go back to the 1800s. These are from the early 19 teens. The exact date is kind of unknown, but this is Art Ross. Most people know of him because of the Art Ross Trophy. And he started that as a manager coach for the Bruins in, I believe, the late 40s, I believe. And he started that trophy for his own team. And the NHL liked it, and it eventually was given out, for the whole league. And here's Cyclone Taylor, Fred Taylor. And he was like the first great defenseman and was really known to be the first defenseman to skate across the ice with the puck and score, coast to coast. Like my man Paul Coffey. And you had some of these, like the 1936 O-Pee-Chee. And here's Ice Kings. So you did have some vintage cards from other sports, but not as much as baseball. And not as far back as baseball. I thought that was a great conversation. I wanted to participate in it. I wanted to share it with you. So thanks for watching. I gots to go.